Awesome.
Awesome.
Okay. So hi everyone, I'm Sharia. This is Rich. Rich, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, my name's Rich Pere. I'm the founder and CEO of Tenarch, which is an evidence-based recruiting platform.
Cool. So there's a lot to recruiting. There's a lot to hiring. Today, we're going to focus on basically how to write job descriptions, how to define roles in detail. So I've taken as an example a company that I work with, Synapse, and they've put out a few job descriptions out there for various engineers because they're growing pretty fast. Just based off of what you're seeing here, Rich, like what's sort of your first instinct when you see something like this software development role?
Sure. So I think that at a high level, what I look for when I look for job descriptions is I look for, are they more of an advertisement, or are they more sort of like a bucket of requirements? And I tend to want people to focus more on the ad aspect of it. And I think the reason why is because I think we're trained like, oh, I'm gonna sit down and I'm gonna, on a blank sheet of paper, I'm gonna write down everything that has to go into this job, and then I'm gonna publish it. But if you have to think about it from the consumer, the person that's reading this thing, that's like not, like, would you rather read like a comic book or an encyclopedia, right? Like one thing is like a story and there's narrative and, there's pictures, and the other thing is has a bunch of information that's like pretty dry. So write for your audience. And that also means, like, as a hiring manager, you probably need to do two things, right? You sort of need to write down all those requirements and like what you want in what I call like a blueprint or like a spec, and then you turn that into an ad. But let's just focus on what we've got in front of us right here. So right now, right at the top, it's like software development and UI UX design. Like, is that one job? Is that two jobs? Are you looking for like sort of a unicorn that can do both things? Like it's sort of unclear here. And also, again, back to your audience, like people are skimming, right? So like if I'm a UI UX designer, am I intrigued by this? Am I scared because it says software development, and vice versa, right? And so, all right, so then Synapse is looking for software developers who can operate both in the high-tech world of cutting-edge mobile and web development, and the highly artistic world of film, television, and new media production. So like, okay, that's cool that you said, here's what we want. I tend to advise people to tone down like cutting edge mobile and web development, unless like you really are doing cutting edge stuff.
Yeah.
Let's like be pragmatic, right?
Yeah.
And I think that first of all, right off the bat, I would say that the person that you're targeting with this particular thing is very rare, right? Like I can count probably on one hand the number of people that like are extremely skilled software developers and extremely skilled UI UX designers. So then the question is like, what's the point of this? Like if there's only so few of these people, you probably don't need a job description at all. You need to be like finding these people and like contacting them directly and like telling them about this job and getting them interested. So again, that's like another thing, is like a job ad like this is supposed to be broad, but if you're really looking for a very niche thing, it's maybe not not worth it, I guess. But but let's keep going, I guess.
Wait, that's interesting though, right? Because like there's what I hear is there's two different things. One is the intersection of software and UI UX, right? And the other thing, but this ad seems to be talking about, is like software and the highly artistic world of film, television, and new media production. Like this also seems to me like kind of a different intersection that they're trying to reach for, right? Is this, almost like a leading question, like, is this the best way to do that, right?
Yeah. I think I love that. And actually, that's a very good point that I missed here, which is like, if you were going to write this from scratch, you wouldn't write it this way, I don't think. What I would say is like to think about like, okay, like you imagine this is newspaper copy or an ad, et cetera. This is your lead, right? Like don't bury your lead. What's the most exciting thing about Synapse, right? Like when we were, I used to work for a company called Crashlytics, and when we were a total startup, and our lead was like, want to work on a system that has like huge scale, because that was like we were a total company, but we were on millions of mobile devices. And so the right person would see that and be like, oh yeah, like that's like the thing that gets me fired up as an engineer, gets me excited. And so I don't know Synapse enough. I just literally saw this job thing when you shared your screen.
Mm-hmm.
If that's really the draw, if you're like, hey, we want to hire engineers who want to work in film, television, and new media production, what's your, hey, want to work on X? Like write that as your first thing, because you have to hook people like any lead to get them to understand like, oh, okay, like now I'm excited, tell me more, right? So that's how I would rewrite that opener completely.
Out of curiosity, like, so this is on the website itself,
Yep.
right? But given that this is the intersection of like software developers who are interested in film, television, like, do you think there's something that companies like this can do to find that niche more? So like another example is I used to consult for a company that was a vegan food review startup, right? So they really wanted to find the intersection of software engineer and vegan, right? So because then they'd have somebody who like would actually use the product every day and would do that and would get excited about it and have this all like this background knowledge about the product. Like, of course you have to list your jobs on your website, but like if you know what your niche is already, right? Like how would you go about finding these people?
Yeah, I love that question. I think that that sort of leads into like a deeper conversation. I'll try to keep it high level, but there's a mindset shift that needs to go on if you're like if you're a person hiring. And I think that I encounter people that have this idea of like, oh, I'm just gonna hang my like help wanted sign, you know, out the front of my business, which is kind of what this is, and then people are gonna come to me. And that's a pretty outdated way of thinking about it, because you know, you're one little sign on a block that's global, right? And how are people going to really find you and be interested in you? The odds are very long. You have to sort of go to where people are. And there are lots of different ways to do that. But to build on what you were saying, I think you have to find those communities. And there's lots of different ways to do that. I think there's a company that I think is very interesting called pallet.xyz, and their product, as I understand it, is basically like job boards for people who have communities, whether that's like a mailing list, newsletter, et cetera. And that kind of targeting is really interesting because you're catching people at their point of interest, where they are, and they're like, oh yeah. So in your example, like, hey, there's a vegan influencer that has a, you know, a vegan tech blog. I'm sure that thing like that exists. I don't know that it exists, but if you can like say, hey, we want to run a job ad on your mailing list, whether it's through Pallet or you just reach out to them directly, that's going to be highly effective at finding the people. And you have to think that I think you have to think creatively, especially when you're hiring in a competitive market for like anybody that's on this list, you know, software developers, QA people, et cetera. These people are in demand. So you have to get really creative about finding them and pitching them. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I think that's what's interesting, is that it is an attention game. Like the question, like the number of people you actually get on your career site is going to be small in comparison to, say, the number of people who see an ad for your company mentioned in like their favorite YouTube channel.
That's right.
So yeah,
that's right.
So that's very fair. Yeah.
I think that also, you know, as I'm taking this in, one of the things that they're doing here that I advise against is that it's you know, plenty of people do it this way. They're sort of saying like, here's the bucket of all the technology people that we want to hire, right? I tend to be more interested in saying like, for each one of these things, so like React Native mobile app developers, full stack JavaScript developers, UI, UX designers, QA automation engineers, I'd rather break those out into separate roles, even if you're replicating some of the text, and have them broken out into individual jobs. And the reason I think that is interesting and important is because we're trying to go from general to specific. And the more specific you can get, the more likelihood that someone is going to be like, oh, that's me, or that thing is interesting and it's relevant to me. And this is actually really important when you consider the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion. There's a bunch of research that's shown, for example, men tend to apply to jobs and not really look at what the requirements say, right? So they you know, not that they say like, oh, I think I'm qualified. They just sort of like are okay putting themselves out there. You know, qualifications on a website be damned. Women, on the other hand, tend to look at the requirements and make an internal assessment about their readiness and then put themselves out there, right? So I think that the more that you can be specific about what the requirements are and sort of target each individual role, the chances are that you're going to find people that are a good fit. And
so specifically when I see the words maybe experience, right? Some people might say, oh, I have 2 years experience, I'm experienced, right? And others might say, I only have 8 years of experience, I don't think I really know the subject. Like,
I love it.
This is like a very internally driven question of like, what does experienced mean? Right?
I also think that on building on that subject too, you should take the opportunity to sort of self-bias bust. And so like, I love to see at the bottom of the job description or something, they say like, hey, we have, here are our requirements, but like, if you are interested in this role, but don't feel like you meet all those requirements, we want you to send the right, like explicitly ask for that. So to sort of understand that like, hey, there may be reluctance and actually give people permission to send it in, because like, you know, maybe people who have a majority are going to do that anyway, but you really want to try to you don't want to exclude anybody, especially at the top of the funnel. So yeah, more specific. Also, these things do, I mean, after I was just saying like, hey, you got to get more niche, you can't rely on, you know, your job just sort of being out there. It is true though that there's plenty of things that are scraping job sites and syndicating jobs and putting them onto job boards and things like that. And like, if you are writing your jobs in that kind of language, the chances that those jobs will get picked up, like syndicated into other places, is better than what this is. And so like, if you were to open up a Google tab and just Google like software development job Synapse, I bet you it probably would not be syndicated in very many places. And that's not the best way to hire. But if you're spending the energy to do this, you might as well, like, it's like running an ad on one site versus running an ad on thousands of sites. You might as well do the right thing to get it sort of scraped up by like Google's job scraper and like all these other things. And this format is like not going to do that for you.
Interesting. Okay. Is there like a standard published format, or
there is. If you Google, like under Google like Webmaster Tools, they have like a jobs metadata format. And there are sites that you can, like, if you use like any kind of ATS or whatever, like they will do all that tagging for you. So there are tools and plugins and things that you can do to sort of automate this, so you don't have to like write it up yourself. But yeah, there are sort of standards available for this kind of thing. Yeah,
that's super interesting. So like, okay, like to kind of summarize everything we've gone through, one is like try to avoid words like cutting edge. That seems like, you know, it doesn't quite mean anything in the modern world anymore. Two is like asking people to kind of be unicorns, or even implying that you want them to be unicorns in the sense of, oh, this is software and UI UX. That's kind of that'll sort of turn a lot of people off, I guess, right? Or confuse them at the very least. And the second is when there is actually a niche that you want to explore, which is, say, software developers in the world of film and television, then that's something you can actually plan for and sort of, you know, go find that community first and then try to like post to your job to them. And then the next thing is about sort of the, you know, the different ways that people will take the word experienced or will sort of bucket themselves. And yeah, I think those are all fantastic points. And the final one being like, yeah, there's standard formats for job descriptions out there. And if you do it right, then the rest of the internet will kind of do some of the heavy lifting for you, and will like make sure your job description is blasted all across. So you can just kind of hang your help wanted poster outside. It just has to look a particular way. But once you get that, then it actually does get like scattered out. But that's a different strategy than what we were talking about earlier, which is like go find your niche and just go try to really advertise to them.
Exactly. And I think that the world of hiring, especially for technology roles, is so competitive. The answer has to be yes to everything, right? You can't, like, you have to do wide distribution and you have to do niche. You have to do targeted recruiting and you have to do broad recruiting. And so that, I mean, that feels really daunting. But I also think that, you know, if you took the time to write this up, it's only a few more steps to like do the next cut at this. And that helps you capture more attention here. because I don't think that this is really working for the company at the moment.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things is like we really discount how important hiring is, or I don't know if we do, like I think the two of us understand it, that's why we're doing this, right? But I think there is this idea that like you can save yourself a ton of time if you put the right signals out there, right? If you draw the right people to you, like doing a lot of that, that's like advanced work that just pays great dividends down the line when you're actually the hiring manager, or when you're the manager of these individuals and you want to figure out what makes them tick. It's like, well, you know already if you got them through the community, you know, like these, you can sort of solve these long running problems very early on with good hiring practices.
I agree. And I think that the other thing here is that, and I don't know about the hiring managers at this company, but since we talked about experience, I think that doing that exercise can help you internally sort of quantify what you're looking for, which is so important, right? Because assuming this works, you're going to see a bunch of profiles and resumes come through, and you have to decide, okay, like who am I going to interview or put through a process? This is very time intensive for everybody involved. And so if you really think about like, oh, like actually, ideally we would have somebody who's a senior UI UX designer, and that means XYZ years of experience, like whatever senior means to you. But if we saw somebody that was a junior UI UX designer with these attributes, we would also be interested in them. Kind of spending some time to refine what these things mean will really help your entire process scale, and also be less biased, right? Because if you don't know sort of exactly what you're looking for and what your parameters are, like ideally senior, but could go to junior under these circumstances in this last example, you're likely to sort of be unduly influenced by whoever kind of shows up at your front door, right? And I think that you ideally don't want to be in that situation.
Yeah, I think of it as trade-offs rule everything around me. So if you know what trade-offs you're willing to make, which is that, hey, I'm okay with a junior UX person if they're really passionate about Hollywood and about filmmaking and stuff, and they're really excited to get into it, I would accept a junior person. Like, to understand that some of your parameters can be shifted around. And I think that like it's not just like you're compromising. It is that actually when people are doing their job, some things like being really interested in the product niche is a pretty big advantage, and can in fact, you know, like counter a lack of experience and that type of thing.
I absolutely agree. And I also think that like being flexible on this thing helps you make good decisions. I think that just to build on sort of my intuition about when we say experienced, it's you can sometimes find yourself in this trap where you find people that are qualified, but then you're like, oh, I don't know, maybe I should hold out to interview somebody that's more experienced. There's always going to be somebody that has more experience. And so then you end up in this hesitation game, and which is exactly where you can't be in a market like this, because people that are interested in your company are typically going to have multiple offers, and they're typically going to be moving relatively quickly. And so if you like somebody and they fit your parameters and you can say yes to them, you have an advantage over every other company that has worse hiring practices. They're more hesitation, more bureaucracy, they're slower. So having tight criteria helps you actually sort of win at finding great people.
So I think that in itself would be a great episode to dig into, which is
for sure
market dynamics, and how you respond to them, and how sometimes things like responding quickly, right, and just sort of putting an offer in front of people immediately is a strong way of saying I value you and come join us now. Like that can be a very strong signal, which I think gets lost when we talk about like total comp and like these other factors in people joining and leaving jobs.
Absolutely. I don't know if you want to dig into that now, but I have a lot to say on like basically like speed of offer and like speed of interview process and having a really great candidate experience. This is kind of a thing that like no one gets on the phone with me and says like, hey, Rich, my goal is to have like the worst candidate experience possible. No one's aiming for bad, but the default is actually pretty bad. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. And the good news is there's a lot of things that you can do as a hiring manager, as a recruiter, to improve that pretty dramatically. So like the baseline is really low. So I think you can make some improvement really quickly.
I love it. This is fertile ground for us. I want to do this in like part 2, part 3, and just keep going with it.